And the next one who we'll invite to the stage is Bjorn Hurri, who is a well-respected concept artist known for his speed and imagination. He joined Opus Arts as their lead artist and art director 10 years ago, working on multiple AAA titles. Let's welcome Bjorn with a round of applause.
So, I've worked in the industry for over 10 years, and I've also been an educator for 8 years. I usually have these massive lectures on very large workshops, over 2 hours long. And so I thought today, as I don't have 2 hours to go into like massively intricate details of concept art, I'll have a little bit more of a kind of open forum lecture. So during the talk, if you have a question, just raise your arm and someone will come give you a microphone. So don't, like, it's not going to be some sort of slides. I have pictures and I'm going to be talking. No, it's okay. All right. So I work at an outsourcing studio in London called Opus Arts, which is 2D outsourcing only, and we work for all the major publishers like Microsoft and Sony and Ubisoft, and we over these 10 years of working with concept art, we have managed to squeeze in ourselves to this short list of for developers. So these big publishers who need something to be developed, they come to us. They have like a list of maybe 10 studios, and these people contact us first before they go to another studio. So we are forced to, not forced, but we have the ability to help develop IPs. And you guys have been talking about IP development and don't sell your IP and all these things, which is an interesting point because I come from a point where publishers approach us to say, we have this IP, they probably bought the license for, or they have internally created and they want it to be developed into maybe a AAA product. So the intro or this talk is going to be a little bit of a retrospective over the 10 years of me working in the industry. So it's going to be a little bit of me thinking back about like how the industry in concept art, because it's a very new thing really, if you think about it in the game industry and game development, because I started being interested in it in around 2000. And the year 2000, you know, it was not that many years since you started getting PC games, you know, 95, 94 maybe. And during that time, concept art were more or less just a great illustrator that he did the cover art, and they kind of figured out how to make the assets through that. And I remember like around the year 2000, 2001, I stumbled onto a website which was called conceptart.org, and I heard only about like what concept art is, but I always played the games, you know, on PC and so on. So I figured out like what is this concept art thing, and little by little I started realizing that it is a form of you know, art for games, and as a like avid creator of games even before PC games, like I made board games with my brother that we played on the table. We went and stole foam for building houses with, and we sprayed the dining table full of this foam, and we started cutting mountains and paths, and we started planting trees and things in our kitchen, and we started making games out of it. And my mother and father came home, and we had to buy a new table. So concept art growing, finding the first steps of concept art. I remember this one studio in America, which was called Massive Black. They were a group of people who were all working in the industry, and they had so much work that they had to ask their friends of how can you help me out with this contract, and I need to get it done. And they started, eventually they created a studio, outsourcing studio. And one of the organizers or creators of Massive Black, they created a workshop in 2004, the first one in Europe. And at that time I was just learning and wanting to learn. And I went to this workshop to learn from them. And one of the things he said that really kind of struck my a chord in me, and he said, like, you have to become undeniable. Like, the way that he said that before they created the studio, there wasn't a really demand for concept art. They only had the studio had their illustrator guide, and they didn't understand like the benefits of it. And they had to show the industry, and they had to create their own line of work. You know, they created a specific path of game development that, you know, if nowadays, 10 years later, a lot of people use. I mean, everyone needs concept art and marketing art and ability to showcase your stuff, and not just traditionally painted painting. And that's a very interesting point, like the whole becoming undeniable, because a lot of us indie developers, I mean, I created my own game as well, by the way. And a big part of the, like, being your own indie game is, like, for me, when it comes to that, is how can you make something that, because indie games, if you publish yourself, they don't need to conform. You can create something experimental or interesting, or you know, straight down the line of what is a main market game. And as I said, I don't have any slides, so I'm going to try to squeeze in a little bit of when I'm going back in history. I'm going to try to fit in what concept art looked like at that point. So around 2000, 2004, I started making my own indie games with people who were very interested in making indie games. Most likely everyone in here. And there was one, I don't remember who said, but make sure, it was, he left, or changed seats. He said, make friends, or talk to everyone, and start to do things together, because I started, back then, finding this forum on internet, and I started talking to everyone and becoming interested in it, and I was like, I want to know what this is. I want to learn absolutely everything that is about this, because this became something that really I burned for, and all these people, like, this is very old art, by the way. I'm gonna grow up, right? So this is a very old concept art from 2003. I think I was just learning, and I was together with a guy, another artist who designed everything for after Super Metroid Forward. He worked for Nintendo at the time, called Andrew Jones. Me and him started making this idea of a joust game, indie game. So we asked other people in the industry in the same way, like they created this Massive Black. Is like, how can we make something that's interesting for us? So we, let's see, there was a slide. No. So we, so me, him, and a couple of other people. Just at that time, we were amateurs, more or less, and we started making these games and grow more and more. And the same for me. I also was doing modifications and my own indie games on the side to learn and produce something. And it was a really kind of a point where I thought that I should really go after this. So I quit my day job, and I went to university to learn more properly to make video games. So I went to, at that time in 2004, it was only 3D universities available. So I went to this 3D university in Sweden and started learning everything. And around that time, I devoted myself fully to art. And luckily, there was a company called Creative Assembly. They were the Sega was their publishers, and they hired me while in university because they had issues with development of their IP, and because I had such a passion for it, I had been learning since 2000. And in this forum that I mentioned, I had started a sketchbook where I was exploring everything from related to concept art, because I wanted to kind of break it down and learn everything. So they contacted me while in university, while I was trying to learn to make games, to make a big AAA game. So this is like just a list of the finished concept arts that they asked for. And their problem, which they had, which was breaking down their product, so what they wanted to make. So I had to like take over. They hired me full time to develop each character, and here you can see what didn't make it, which was thousands, hundreds of different versions, and each icon has, you know, maybe 20 each version of each character, and you had to I had to break everything down what they had done, and for them to be able to grasp their idea of what they wanted to make. And then when they understood what they wanted to make, I started redrawing every character so that they could all agree on like what they wanted to make. And and at that time, I kind of remembered again about the fact that you have to be undeniable. I kept pushing that aspect of, okay, so apparently before I'm even finished being educated in making games, big AAA studios are hiring me to help them make their big games, so I must be on to something. So I started diving in a lot further into developing, making their IP stronger, and that in a way kind of brought me to keep pushing the pipeline and making sure that whatever you're doing, you should always kind of visually explore and the importance of concept art. And so at that time, like if you look at this picture, so when I started being interested in games, it was at around 2000, right? And those are the games that were popular at the time. And then this year was the year I started learning concept art, and that leap from imagination. I mean, there's like Zelda, Majora's Mask, which is very creative, but then on these ones, they really started pushing concept art and illustrations, and that was at the time where, for example, the studio I mentioned called Massive Black, that's where they started getting a lot of work, and how people was realizing that concept art is actually something super powerful, and that they can use even small companies or big companies. So I started, like really driving hard into that and trying to figure that out. So later on, I was hired by them to Sega hired me full time as soon as the day I finished my education. I moved to England, and over there I started. I was an in-house artist, the only concept artist for a studio with over 100 people, and they were developing not only one game, but they were developing their flagship game, which is the Total War series. And at that time it was tried and tested. They started actually as a port. They ported games as originally as their kind of shoe into the industry. So they were completely a porting studio. And then they started making their own games, and so on and so on and so on. And around this time, again, when I found concept art and started learning it, that's the time where they started making their own first console game, and they were PC exclusive to that point. And they had released it and they had issues with it, and that's when they hired me to do their big AAA game. And so I went there, and I really started having to figure out this whole concept art thing and how to solve it, because again, at 2004 or 5, it wasn't really standard like it is today. Like concept art is now a specific job, and like you can go to school to learn to be a concept artist. And the whole pipeline of like, if you're going to work for a studio with 200 or 300 people, 400 people, and you have an army of maybe 20 concept artists, like what is the standards they need to follow, what is the things they need to learn. Even as an indie developer, you're making a product, and you're going to have to do something to someone down the line. So if you are the only artist that does everything, you have to know nowadays exactly everything that you have to be able to do. And it goes a little bit like full circle. Like at the beginning, when I started learning everything in 2000, or seeing everything and doing indie games, it was like you had to be the one that did everything, and try to make a business out of it. So I remember being in the studio there and trying to kind of solve the issue, and also and then when I started working there, I was exposed to this idea of pre-production, or pre-vis. And what that is, when you're working for a large IP or a large studio, is that before they devote millions of dollars to develop this game, they need to know what's the potentiality of it. And a lot of these marketing people, they hire also outsourcing marketing studios, so that they first do a packet of art and direction and like IP, and then they go and hire marketing studios and go, okay, so what is the potential for these IPs? And it all becomes this massive collaboration of potentiality. At that time, I started doing previs for a game. These are low-res pictures, but a previs for a game called Alien Isolation. But at the time of Alien Isolation, excuse the gore, Alien Isolation, before that, Sega had actually bought the IP to be allowed to do many different Alien games. So I was doing a lot of previs for this alien world, where it was very story-driven between a guy and a woman, who were the sole survivors on a big ship. And I was developing this idea amongst other IPs for them, as the only like really concept artist, or educated concept artist, I guess you could say. And this packet of all this information as tied to the IP, Sega said, okay, you're not doing this game anymore. And they took all the concept art I had done for over a year, which was, let's see here, like this amount of work for a game that they just said, okay, thank you. And they put it on the shelf. And I was like, oh, this will never see the light of day. And a funny note about that, like 2 years later from that point, Sega was a publisher for another game studio, and they had given this packet of all my concept art and world explorations to another studio that was owned by Sega, which had the right to develop this IP, and it came out as another game for the Alien franchise that unfortunately was plagued by bad development. So I kept kind of learning the ropes and figuring out the industry, and which led me to more art direction and full IP development. And the nature of concept art is changing. Like, for example, like our music friend, where is he? He said he worked for Alienation and doing music for it. So I was doing a lot of concept art for that game and helping them developing their world as he was helping them developing their sound. And a weird thing like collector's edition, limited edition concept art as a perk for buying a game is, you know, it's in 2000 or 2004 that was unheard of. And when you're doing a full pipeline, you also have to like learn and figure out, like in marketing terms, you know, how do you make something that sells an image of the whole game. Like I don't remember who was talking about it, but there's some sort of like a sentence or something to sell the idea. And because we started being able to develop IPs correctly, a studio hired us, which was called, they made a specific game called Dishonored. So this is previous, before they actually sold the IP to publishers. They had to do this one of these packets to convince them that this is a game worth doing. So we were one of a few studios that helped the art director develop the idea. So this is all like before they've gone into production. Not even a single artist had started making the game yet at this point. So usually what we do is that when they hire us to do previews, we explore our world with the art director very closely, and then we don't hear anything for many years later until they go into production, and then they go, yeah, we have budget for 300 people. It's a AAA. By the way, thank you for the help of giving us all that money. Would you like to do some more work for us now that they have like a clean direction? So here was for these stilt walkers or whatever they were called, blowing the picture completely. Anyways, so we were developing this idea, and where is it? That is the in-game version, kind of like similar scene. So it's a London-based studio, so we were walking around in London like in early mornings and seeing these fog banks and all these things, and we started developing the world based on that. And you can clearly see the influence from London. They even have the London Bridge of sorts in the game. So then at that point we kind of started figuring out, okay, so in that sense we can help other people develop their ideas more efficiently and create art direction. And one of our clients came and asked us to help them with color profiles. Like this game was called The Line, kind of medium success game. But they were struggling towards the very end. We weren't involved at all in the production or pre-production, but they hired us at the end saying, like, oh, there's something missing here, not something that we don't understand. Like, why isn't the marketing liking what we're showing them? That there's some sort of struggle to tick those boxes of what sells. So we gave them like suggestions visually, you know, to sex up the visuals, and I'm probably going to have to pick it up a bit. So let's see. So then that led to another client who was they were developing a Polish studio. They were developing a new type of fantasy game, and they had a lot of worlds that looked like this, and they had no idea what it should look like. And because we were really interested in developing IPs and visuals and very forward in previs, we started painting on top and saying, you know, like, what if this, like, what if it looks like this, or what if it looks like that? This for them is extremely cost efficient. They pay us per day, we paint completely different worlds for them, and then they can go, yeah, this is a great direction, or that. So same for this, is same problem. And they wanted something that would indicate like fighting, and they had this idea on paper, in words. We need to see a sense of battle on the outside. How can we sense it? So we gave them that that kind of paint over to say, oh well, you could do this, but this again was in a situation like that. Maybe not that bad, but maybe in a situation like that. Is to show them tons of different versions, and then they go, yeah, we like that, we want to do this, or so. And that led me to someone talked about division. We have helped division as well in that sense because of the interest in developing. So this is more towards like AAA and huge budgets, and their pipeline is completely different. They have to play test everything before the visuals are being developed, so it plays well. So they send us these, and they go, we need to have flavor to this world. So we do paint overs and test out different things so they can see what the place and value and a marketing team and everyone gets involved to check out, like, okay, this is what we want to do. And that goes to another AAA, which was called Battlefield Hardline, which unfortunately had some development issues and wasn't as big a success as they wanted. But they hired us from beginning, from previs. They hired me to develop the look. They got approved by EA. They got the huge budget, and they contacted us directly after, saying, okay, help us develop it. So we were actually helping them, like, fully concepting every little nook and cranny of the game, so that they could really, direct, because there's a new feature now, or at this point in time was a new one, that they're outsourcing out the outsourced art. So they pay us to make art, they get the art, then they outsource the art to 3D people in another country that then send it back to the people making the game, and they assemble the game in the main studio. So it's a completely new aspect of outsourcing everything, and then the mother hen who sits on the egg. So it's a challenging thing to do because you're not a part of the studio. You're usually dealing with the art director, and the art director usually have 100 artists nowadays, and he has to juggle absolutely everything. So as a plug-and-play player into this whole crazy machine, you have to absolutely know every in and out of the process of creating something. And so if they have issues with 3D, for example, each and every single of these line drawings is based on their 3D blockout, so that they have a gray box version of each and every location, either before or after. How much time do I have left? 2.5. Okay, I'll jump ahead a little bit. Let's see here. Yeah, so for example, designing characters that it also has many layers. Actually, I'll jump to this one. This is from a new game called Sea of Thieves. And this was the previs for Sea of Thieves before they were approved to have their look. And they were approved, but they didn't like the style. So they hired us to go back to the style and redevelop it. And I stumbled onto a style that ended up looking like this. And they were really happy about it. Again, I'm not allowed to show the concepts. They're not around online, so I can't really show it. But the the visual development and searching for this style, what they ended up with taking my drawings more or less and making them into 3D. Let's see if I can capture a moment. But you can literally like see how they how they try to emulate brushstrokes into 3D and having it like this kind of tactile painting, which is a really interesting thing to see and an enjoyable thing. And it's same for example, in Division. I was hired to sell the world to publishers, Ubisoft. And the original version of Division was very Tom Clancy, like black killers, you know, with the night vision goggles and drones and all these things. And it eventually ended up being, went back and redid the visuals, so it became a completely different thing. So I can just quickly kind of pass through for this Polish company I started talking about. They wanted a lot of enemies and visual development. So we helped them out with that, designing all their characters. They had issues with flavor again. That's a very common thing in when they're huge projects and there are millions of dollars involved. So I was handed a painting from them that wasn't like this, but the same idea, and I painted over it and made it interesting. And they ended up basing it to their reveal trailer. So I can show that. And again, they almost translated the brush strokes and textures I painted almost exactly. So all these characters, except the main character, I helped them design. And some of them I just gave them a second pass of thinking, you know, understanding that what they had done was good enough. You don't need to reinvent for the sake of reinventing. It's like if you can see that some elements are really strong and you just enhance it a little bit and go straight to production or back to production. So that's painted there. Finished? Any questions? It is chaos of talking.
Actually, I got one.
Yeah, you have?
Hi. So, as far as I understood, you mostly work at contract works, right?
That's correct. We only outsource for other big studios.
And the question is, what about your visions about games, and have you made something your idea?
Yeah, but I'm, for example, I'm lucky enough where I've since 2000 started reverse engineering everything and kind of figuring out everything, how it works. So that a lot of studios contact us, me, in particular to help them get the flavor of like what is great. So I am able to put a lot of myself into their IPs, but that can only be that interesting for a certain point Does internet work?
Yeah.
So to answer your question about my own stuff, I do develop my own things. I try to sell them or make games. And here's a good example, for example, for Division, the latest update. This is a concept of mine, and there's the 3D version. And again, they went pretty like one-to-one with color and so on. But my point being is, I develop IPs because that's my strength. And I have my own IP I developed, is a movie. For example, this is the latest I'm trying to, or in process of making in Hollywood. This kind of horror movie. and I have made my own indie game. I can show that as well. Any other question?
Obviously, concept art for a game is a big thing, and it really makes games better. However, we here are mostly indie developers and can't afford paying for top tier concept artists. So what are the solutions for indie developers to get affordable concept art? And one idea of mine is that is it like okay to take inspiration from concept art that's made for other games, or just
Yeah, well, to answer that, and it's like someone else has mentioned that we're a talker, that like I started out doing indie games and mods and learning in the figuring everything out. So you should also talk to each other, find an artist that maybe is not the like AAA 10 years plus artist that has done, you know, big games costs. You won't get able to match money there. Hire someone that costs, you know, X amount of dollars a day. But if you have a skilled artist that doesn't have that huge track record, that still wants to learn and make games, you can easily find a great artist online that hasn't have loads of experience.
Luigi and Mario.
Sorry?
It looks like Luigi and Mario.
Yeah, this was a game I created with a friend of mine. It's a play on other games, like a Mario. This game was called The Other Brothers instead of the Mario Brothers. They were called Joe and Jim, and you can see maybe behind the car when it drives off, if it shows here, there's Sonic as a pet hedgehog. And you can't really see much in this display, but it was a game we made. We sold maybe 60,000 copies. We were on all the front pages on iOS, and on all the big websites, like we talked about, these print. But we because it was our own first big game, we fell on reviews. It's a long story. I can tell you about over and over again.
Any other questions?
No?
Okay, thank you, Bjorn.
Thank you.